Well, so what about that connection then between the school and that place?
There was a family called Paganel.
That's right. So it was a family called Paganel that owned it at one time. Often, if a house stays around for years and years and years, lots of different people, different families live in it. And for a few years, during the 1100s, there was a family called Paganel that lived there. It wasn't their only castle. Mr. and Mrs. Paganel, if we want to call them that, they owned another castle just a few miles away. Have any of you been here?
Yes.
Yeah. You might have been to the castle. What else have you been to there? The zoo. Yeah. So there's a castle which was owned by the Paganel family as well as Wheelie Castle, and then nearby, in the grounds of it, is a zoo. And I used to go there when I was your age, from Wolverhampton. And in those days, they don't have elephants at Dudley Zoo anymore. But you used to be able to have a ride on an elephant. I remember that. And a camel as well. They don't have that anymore. They've changed. Yeah.
In the castle, we used to be like this little dungeon thing. And me and Dad and Jane went in there, and we could feel all the bones and everything.
In the dungeon. A Dudley Castle was that, or a Dudley Castle? Yes, you can see there's an awful lot more left of Dudley Castle than there is of Wheelie Castle, isn't it? Wheelie Castle, the stone is only about that high, isn't it? Dudley Castle has got a big tower that you can see for miles and miles right on a hill in the middle of Dudley. Now, you won't, I don't think, have heard of this lady. Though, or have you? Have you? You won't. Really? Yeah. So, gosh, right. Well, her name was Jane Webb when she was a little girl. She later got married, and so her surname changed. But she was born Jane Webb, and she was born in a house in Berkeley Green called Kitwell House. There's still an area of Birmingham called Kitwell today. And that's her, and you can see she lived a long time ago, about 200 years ago she was born. And she married a man who designed gardens, and his name was John Loudon, it was pronounced. And you could pay him, if you had a very big garden, you could pay him and he would design it and put all the shrubs and the flowers and the paths and everything in. He designed Birmingham Botanical Gardens, which are not many miles away over in Hartlepool. But after she married, she began to write articles and books about gardening, because gardening became very popular at this time. And they have lovely illustrations in them of all the flowers you could grow in your garden. She wrote a book called Gardening for Ladies, and another book called The Lady's Companion, or Flower Garden. And it encouraged people to grow flowers and make their own gardens. So she was a local person. But she wrote another book which has become even more famous than that. And hardly anyone knows that this lady from Berkeley Green wrote this book. But even if you haven't read the book, you'll almost certainly recognise what's on this next picture. Have you heard of the Mummy?
Yeah.
You have you? Yeah. Well, she wrote a book about a mummy coming back to life and walking around Britain in the 20th century. And that story that she wrote then became a film, and lots of films. There are hundreds of films about the mummy. But originally the story was written by a lady from down the road. There's lots of horrible versions of them. He doesn't look very well at all. And her idea was a mummy from ancient Egypt. Have you done the Egyptian?
Yeah.
Well, and you know that the mummies came from thousands of years ago, 5,000 years ago. She imagined the mummy coming back to life in modern Britain and seeing what it had and what sort of life people led in there. Did I say a hand go up there? Yes.
The only reason mummies were wrapped around in linen was because they stuffed them with sawdust and they didn't want the sawdust to come out.
That's absolutely, yes. Oh, you're an expert on how to wrap up the bodies. Yes, you're right. Yeah. And then when archaeologists get hold of them, they wrap them again. Yeah. But they were stuffed. Yes. But well, this one wasn't stuffed because he came back, and that was the world he imagined. So a really important book written by someone from just down the road, which became a bestseller and then became lots and lots of films. That's number 2. Here's number 3. And this lady came from Berkeley Green as well. And I don't know, has anyone heard of this one? No. Okay. Well, she was a normal little girl who went to the local school, and then at the age of 10, she fell off her bike and banged her head, and it had a terrible effect on her. Do you know? We won't get into the medical details here, but what makes you grow taller is a little gland, a little device at the back of your head, and it turns itself on when you're born, and you grow to the height you should be, and then it turns itself off again. But because Jane banged her head, it didn't turn off. So she continued to get taller and taller and taller until she became the tallest woman in the world. And she was, when she went at her full height, she was just short of 8 feet tall.
Yeah, she'd be, the top of her head would be there. That's big.
And so tall, it isn't much fun. And Jane had to leave school, partly because she was teased, because she was so tall. She was lots higher than any of the other children in her class. But also, they couldn't actually find a desk for her to sit at. She was too big even for that to try. They couldn't find a chair or a desk for her to sit at, so she had to, her mum took her out of school, and that was the end. So she was very embarrassed about her height, because it did make her stand out, and people, I'm sure, must have said, look at her, she's really tall. But I think the most spectacular thing about her was that she never cut her hair. So her hair continued to grow as long as she continued to grow, and eventually it was even taller than that. It was, what is that? About 3 metres long her hair was, and lots of people tried to buy her hair off her as a souvenir, but she wouldn't have it cut. And even her bed wasn't long enough. She had to sleep with her feet sticking out. And so it wasn't as much fun as you'd think to be really tall. But if you're ever in Berkeley Green, do you recognise this? This is the local library in Berkeley Green. And Jane Bumper used to live in a cottage that was right opposite there. And a few years ago, they put up a plaque to commemorate her, and it says how tall she was and where she lived. And this is a man who owned a factory, or in the end he owned lots of factories, and his name, you can see it's got a long name, was George Elkington. So he was alive at the same time as our very tall lady, and he was born in Birmingham, and he developed a technique called electroplating. Now that's chemistry. I don't know whether you do much chemistry, and I'm not very good at this, but I'll try and explain it. If you don't, does anyone know what electroplating is? No, that's fine. But he opened a factory which still stands. It used to be the old Science Museum in New Hall Street, right in the centre of Birmingham. You can still see that building, and there's a plaque to Mr. Elkington on it. And when he became a very wealthy man because of his factories, he went to live at this house, which is still standing on the Bristol Road in Selly Oak. It's called Woodbrook House. So that's it. That's him, and this is what he did, and this was very clever. It was the way to get something that looked very, very expensive, but didn't cost very much. Ornaments, things to put on your table to impress people who come to dinner, or on your mantelpiece. And the way it works, and I only know a bit about this because I'm a historian, not a scientist, is you dip it, you take an object like, let's take my cup of coffee, and you put it in a tank like that, a big metallic tank which has got all sorts of chemicals in it. And then you put electricity through the water. And what happens when the electricity goes through is that it plates it puts a covering over the object that we put in the tank. And if you've got the right mixture of chemicals, you can cover it with silver or with gold. And it's called electroplating because you're putting a sort of plate or a cover on the top of it. So I could have my cheap mug of coffee. I'd have to empty it first. And when I take it out, it looks as though it's made of solid gold. Fantastic. Or silver. But actually, if you scratched away a bit, you would see that underneath there was something much cheaper underneath. What Mr. Elkington used to do was, when he had an important visitor, and this is a magazine that records the visit of the Prince of Wales in the 1870s, in 1874, that the Prince of Wales was the son of Queen Victoria. Have you done the Victoria?
Yeah.
Someone would come and visit the factory, and then they would give them a present. And how they would do the presents was they would take a rose, like that one in the top there, and dip it into the liquid. And what would come out? God's rose. So it would come out like that. It would look, and you could either have it silver or gold, but it would look as though you've got a golden rose.
Wow.
And what's nice about this story, and this is true, this actually happened, was when the Prince of Wales came round the factory in Birmingham in 1874, and they did their usual party trick. They took a rose and dipped it into the liquid to give him a golden rose as a souvenir. They didn't notice that there was a spider's web on the rose. And when it came out of the liquid, even the spider's web was coated with gold. I don't know what happened to the spider. The report I read about this doesn't say. With any luck, the spider got away before that happened. But otherwise, you'd have a gold-plated spider that would come out. Sorry, did you want to ask me something?
How would they get the rose out?
You just, all you needed to do was, you mustn't put your hands in those chemicals, because you get gold-plated hands, and that probably wouldn't be very good for your skin. So they had to hook it out. They'd suspend it on a sort of a little metal hook, and then it would dip in. And it took only about 10 minutes to do this, and then lift it out, and then give your guest a rose. This is a bit of an unusual one. You might think this one's a bit of a cheat, but see what you think. Now, do you recognise where this is?
Yeah.
Selly Oak. It is. There's the Bristol Road, and do you know why it's called Selly Oak? Why might you guess?
A guy named Selly found an oak.
Well done. Yeah. Not in the cellar. In Selly Oak. Yes. So once upon a time, there was a very famous tree that stood in Oak Tree Lane in Selly Oak. And that's why it was called Oak Tree Lane, which is just off the Bristol Road. Do you know where Oak Tree Lane is?
Yeah.
And it's why the area, which used to be just called Selly, but because of this tree, it came to be known as Selly Oak, or the Selly Oak. We don't know, because oak trees take hundreds and hundreds of years to grow, as you know, and so somebody planted it before those houses. So it was in a perfectly fine spot, and then people put a street down there and built houses and a road, and suddenly it wasn't in the right spot anymore. So it wasn't the tree's fault, it was that everyone else had put things round it. But and so in 1909, just 100 years ago, the Selly Oak was chopped down, and here's it being chopped down. You can see the man in the middle with an axe, and he's chopping it. I think that's really sad, actually, but anyway, down it came. But in the park, the local park, you'll see this if you ever go there. You'll see a bush like that, and you think you probably walk past it without thinking twice. But if you have a look in it and pull it back, there's a little plaque, and part of the stump of the tree was kept as a souvenir to commemorate it. And so the bottom bit of the tree is there with a little plaque on the top saying, "This is the Selly Oak." There's my 5 heroes. Let's just remind ourselves of one. We've got a lady who wrote books about gardening and also a horror story about the mummy. The man who lived at Wheely Castle and after whom the school's named. A very, very tall lady who lived in Bartley Green. A man who owned factories and lived in a house on the Bristol Road, and I don't know whether you think it is a cheat or not, but a tree. It's a hero of mine. I quite like trees. So it's a very famous tree. After all, they named an area after it. And that's it.
Yeah, that's brilliant.